Hello, hello, and good afternoon to everyone. If you're joining me today, welcome to this weekly installment of my webinars here to touch on nutrition and how they work with or what the interplay of your nutrition and your GLP-1 medications, what's going on there. And so this week's theme is gut health and GLP-1s. What you need to know to maintain a healthy gut microbiome. I have talked about gut health in the past, and I've also talked about some GI issues that you may encounter while taking GLP-1 medications. So this is a little bit of a combination of what I've talked about before and also touches on a few interesting topics that are still front of mind and at the beginnings of research. So we're still learning quite a bit, but we can talk about a few things that we know or at least have furthered our understanding on a bit. So let's get started. So remember, as always, and as we say every week, it's the quality of your calories that matter. And I know we're talking about the microbiome, but there are some high quality, high nutrient dense calories or foods that can help influence your gut health overall. So the quality still matters, even if we're not talking too much about food today. So what we're going to cover is, again, a broad definition of what the gut microbiome is, what we mean when we say that, how weight loss can impact your microbiome without even trying, and also vice versa. I'll touch also on the interplay of GLP-1 medications as well as the kinds that our body makes naturally and how that may be impacted or may impact our microbiome. Some GI issues that you may experience, and a few tips on maintaining a healthy gut, maybe helping to get it to be healthier. And as always, at the end, I do welcome your questions. We'll have time for any questions that come up about this or other nutrition-related topics, so feel free to hit the little button at the bottom left-hand of your screen. If you have a question come up, I'll be happy to address that. So let's talk about the intestinal microbiome. As we know or may not know, it's a diverse ecosystem. It's full of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, viruses. It's in your digestive tract and especially primarily the large intestine. And a healthy microbiome equals a healthy gut equals a healthy body in general, is what we seem to be finding. And it does many tasks. It can help create various vitamins that are helpful for us. It also helps form beneficial compounds such as short chain fatty acids, which we'll talk about how those can be beneficial later on. It may have a good impact on the immune system. It can also produce some neurotransmitters that do help with weight management, and that's why we have that association with our microbiome and weight. So the next few slides will touch on specifically how the gut and the gut bacteria, how they influence or may be influenced by weight. And one of the first times that this was observed was with mice. And so when the microbiome in an obese mouse was transplanted into a germ-free, or essentially when their intestine was, for lack of a better word, maybe sterile or without any bacteria to influence it, when they put that in that germ-free mouse, that mouse then ended up gaining weight. And they saw in there this bacteria ratio between two different types. So there was an increase in firmicutes, is how I will try and pronounce that, and a decrease in the bacteroides. And so that increase and decrease right there was seen in those mice that gained weight. So there was actually a change to their intestinal microbiota, and you also saw a change in their weight. So there's a chance that this firmicutes and bacteroides ratio may be a factor in weight management, but so far the results in humans when we're looking at this ratio are a bit mixed. We do know of some bacteria that seem to be associated with weight loss. There have been some small studies where people who take certain types of probiotics with specific types of strains have noticed maybe a little bit of change in weight without any other change, although studies on diet and changes to probiotics, those can be difficult to control, certainly. But there's these bacteria that have also been observed in the gut that seem to be associated with weight loss as well. Akkermansia at the very top here has gotten quite a bit of attention. Also, this specific strain of lactobacillus and a few other types of bacteria seem to have this relation. But do be aware that they are strain specific. And so there are some lactobacillus strains noted in a literature review that actually were correlated with weight gain. And so sometimes just blindly taking a probiotic supplement might not always be the most helpful choice, because those may not be picking those specific strains. And so I wanted to call that to your attention. Further touching on bacteria and that weight connection. So like we were talking about, there's some weight gain and weight loss and bacteria that are associated with that. And there may be a question as to why, what's going on there. So for weight gain, there are certain microbes that seem to be efficient at basically digesting or making those calories a little bit easier for our bodies to absorb. So I guess we can give them applause for the efficiency, but it might not be what we're looking for necessarily. Also, certain bacteria, or if there's an improper balance, it could be called dysbiosis, and that isn't associated with inflammation and metabolic disorders. And some people will touch on a term called metabolic endotoxemia, which also has to do with the microbiome in the gut, and maybe a topic worth exploring more in depth sometime in the future. When it comes to weight loss, we do know that bacteria influence the production of short-chain fatty acids, and those seem to help with regulating your metabolism, and it can also strengthen the gut barrier. And specifically, these short-chain fatty acids, acetate, butyrate, and propionate, those seem to be the ones that can really help with that weight loss. Also, some of the neurotransmitters, hormones that are produced, those are involved with appetite regulation. For example, GLP-1, the one that our bodies produce. Which is a great segue to the following slide, because I wanted to touch on specifically the GLP-1 in our gut. Because as you know, our bodies do produce this, and it's produced in our intestines, and there are ways that microbes actually stimulate that production. So you can even see with this wonderful image that I found after I put together this particular slide, I found this image and I thought it was just perfect because it was describing in detail essentially what I was looking for. The microbiota in your intestines can create those short-chain fatty acids, which we said are related to weight loss, and those are produced by fermenting certain fibers in our body. They also can convert bile acids, which seem to help stimulate the production of certain gut hormones, and also compounds that are produced from the digestion of fats and protein. And so we can see that it's creating these hormones here, and GLP-1 is here top of the list as a gut hormone, which then influences our metabolism in some ways. And as you can see here at the top, sometimes our metabolism is affected. Our GLP-1 can affect how much we may eat, maybe what we choose to eat. But also what we choose to eat can affect the microbiota in our body. So it's this circular circle of life, if you will, almost, in terms of our microbiome, our gut hormones, and then what we're eating, how much we're eating, and then how that influences it as well. Now, looking past the GLP-1s that our body creates, what about the ones that we might be putting in our body as a medication? How are those involved with the microbiome? And this is an area that's fairly new on the horizon, of course, and so it was a bit of a challenge for me to find too many details as to some exact answers here, but I did find, again, this lovely image here that talks about what they're seeing with GLP analogs, so the medications, and how they're affecting the gut microbiome and what they were seeing as a result. And they noticed that it does alter the composition and diversity of the intestines, and it does seem like they can help with weight maintenance promoting. So it seems like they encourage the existence of those bacteria that are associated with weight loss and weight maintenance, just like the Akkermansia I mentioned earlier. But interestingly enough, the overall diversity seems to decrease in the gut. So it's kind of interesting because people might consider that not necessarily the best thing when you hear it out loud, but there may, in the end, be some benefits to that, since if it's still maintaining the good bacteria. But that is an area that, as you can see, more research is definitely needed, and we want to see, does this happen across the board? Was this a one-off in one study? What are we noticing? And what I thought was particularly interesting was this secondary part that I commented on, in that how GLP-1 medications might also be influenced by our existing gut bacteria. There was one study I noticed that they were looking at how people were responding to the medications they were given. And so they were really looking more into type 2 diabetes and how the blood glucose was being managed. So the responders, they were really paying attention more to that than to weight loss. But they noted that people who seem to have a better response, so better glycemic responders is how they were termed, to these medications, had specific types of gut bacteria in higher amounts. And I will save myself the embarrassment of mispronouncing these, but you can see at the top here, one of those Bacteroides species, along with a few other here, and they did seem to help. Essentially, people who were higher in these types of bacteria seemed to have a better response to the medication, which is very interesting because they essentially hypothesized that they might be able to predict some outcomes depending on someone's gut microbiome. I did want to touch, though, on GI issues that you may experience from GLP-1 medications. It does seem to be one of the top complaints and top side effects that happen, namely constipation, of course. Some people, I've heard one person complain to me about diarrhea in the past. People may also notice nausea, bloating, and gassiness. And there may be that question as to, well, is it our microbiome that's making this more difficult for us, or is the difficulty affecting our microbiome? And my thoughts are that the side effects may decrease. So these GI side effects may actually decrease our intake of the right kind of foods that can help promote the beneficial bacteria. But it's also possible that we need to promote those beneficial bacteria to help minimize those side effects, especially when it comes to constipation. Focusing on good fiber and also hydration can be very instrumental in helping to manage that. So I do have some of those ideas to help treat or maintain your gut health. So I wanted to focus on prebiotics and fiber. And I list here a few options here. Garlic and onions are pretty easy to get into our diet unless you don't like those. But also non-starchy vegetables, the green leafy veggies, beans, also whole fruits. Leave the skin on of your apple or your nectarine. And inulin, chicory root, those tend to be added to basically protein bars and things like that. But I wanted to mention those as well. Also, probiotics in the form of foods is what I wanted to focus on first, because there are a number of probiotic supplements out there, and I would want to research very specifically the name brands. If that's ever something you want me to do, I'm happy to do that. But they change constantly, so I didn't want to name those. Not to mention, everyone's different. So if one probiotic works for one person, it might not work for the other person. So it's really important that we don't necessarily jump to that, but they can be helpful depending. But probiotics in food can be helpful just because we're also getting high nutrient density. So look for yogurts and kefir that do say, or kefir, that do say live active cultures, because some of them might not list that on the label. Also, certain fermented foods, tempeh, kimchi, sauerkraut, and even kombucha. as long as that one's not too high in sugar. Those can also be very helpful to just feed your gut overall. It's also a very good idea to reduce added sugars and reduce processed foods as much as possible, as these can lead to, when we were talking about dysbiosis, so an improper balance of gut bacteria, maybe having more unhealthy gut bacteria versus healthy bacteria. So it's good to reduce those. And also pick foods that have the healthy fats. So you want your monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and you can find those in the fatty fish. If you like sunflower seeds or nuts, those are all full of that. And as I had mentioned before, stay hydrated. We want to keep our gut moving as much as possible. And also, if we're not staying hydrated, our body's not able to function optimally. And stay active. So physical activity is healthy for a variety of reasons, and that includes gut health. So to tie all this together, as you may see, our gut is a complex ecosystem, and we're still learning about everything that it does and how what we do also can influence it. And we are just now starting to learn about those dynamics between our gut health and our weight, and just how much one might influence the other. Be aware that these GLP-1 medications, there may be an effect, and it may be changing that balance, hopefully for the better in our guts, but they may also be affected by what we have, which is, I still think, very interesting. Remember that having that healthy gut may support some better outcomes for not only this medication, but for our health in general. And always be sure to include gut-supporting foods, the ones that you like, of course, into your routine as often as possible. And with that, I leave it open to questions. And I'll just keep it open for just a little bit longer. Well, okay. I'd say that concludes our webinar for today. I hope you found it helpful or informative. And if you have any questions that come up later, or you would like to ask them offline, by all means get in touch with the Premier Weight Loss staff, and they will be happy to get you in touch with me. And I'm always glad to speak with you offline as well. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.